When it comes to durable bedding, there are some good options and some that are not so good. So today I'm going to be attempting to put them in some sort of order and rank them from best to worst. Let's go! Now I'm not just going to review the beddings at random, I've got a set of 5 criteria that I'm going to use to help me evaluate them. The first is safety. This is what's most important. If a bedding is potentially unsafe, then the other 4 criteria won't matter and the bedding will immediately get an F. The next is hygiene. This is related to how absorbent the bedding is and how well it's supposed to control odour. The next is comfort, which is how soft and comfy the bedding is for sleeping in. And next, structure, which is how well the bedding is able to hold up tunnels. And finally, cost. This is not the most important criteria, but it's good to be able to get a bedding that's good for your animals and doesn't break the bank. I'll leave links in the description to some of the safer beddings if you want to use some of them for your own enclosure. So we're going to start with most people's favourite bedding, paper. There are different types of paper bedding, so I'll be looking at each of them separately. The first is the most common type of paper bedding, which is paper pulp, such as this Carefresh. Or you can get similar bedding from KT Clean & Cozy or other brands. So for safety, this is often the bedding that most people recommend and it's claimed to be low in dust. But this may vary depending on where you live and the particular batch of bedding, as I found both brands to be quite dusty straight out of the bag. On top of this, I find my gerbils really enjoy shredding the pieces, which generates even more dust. And as gerbils have very sensitive respiratory systems, a lot of dust can cause them problems. And I noticed my girls got irritated noses when I was using mostly paper, especially as it got closer to cleaning time. Now the dust isn't enough of a safety concern to completely fail this bedding, as limiting the amount you use can help to combat the problem. And from what I've heard in the community, the dust may not be as much of a problem in places like the USA and Canada. So when it comes to the dustiness of paper pulp bedding, you'll probably need to use some trial and error to figure out if it's going to be okay for your gerbils. One benefit of this type of bedding is that it's very absorbent and should have decent odour control. It's also one of the softest beddings you can buy, so it gets full marks for comfort. Another major benefit of using paper pulp bedding is that it's excellent for holding tunnel structure. A tank full of this on its own will allow the gerbils to create really sturdy tunnels that are unlikely to collapse. The natural Carefresh costs around £23 for 3.5 kilograms, which works out at about £6.50 per kilogram. And the other colours, as well as the KT version, cost about the same. So overall, based on my experience, I'd give these beddings a B. I think it's fine to include a small amount, but I wouldn't want to use too much because of the problems I've experienced with dust. But this may be different depending on where you live and how dusty your versions are. So it may take a bit of testing to figure out. They also make different versions of these beddings, such as a scented and odour control version. Both of these, I'd argue, are unsafe to use at all. The essential oils used in the scented beddings may irritate the gerbil's sensitive respiratory systems. And the extreme odour control varieties don't list any ingredients to explain what makes the odour control extreme. The only thing that KT say is that they use discarded remnants and trimmings of hygiene products. And I find it extremely concerning that they don't specify what's used. So needless to say, both the extreme odour control and the scented varieties get Fs. Another type of bedding that I've come across recently is shredded paper bedding. So unlike the paper pulp beddings, this one is much lower in dust. There's basically no dust at all that I've noticed. And as it's just made from paper, there are no other safety concerns with this bedding, so it gets full marks for safety. Because the shredded paper is kind of like tissue paper, it doesn't have the best absorbency or odour control on its own. But as gerbils naturally have very little odour, this isn't too much of a problem. This is almost as soft as paper pulp bedding, so it's nice and comfy as well as warm. The strands of paper make it act like hay in terms of structure. So it's really great for holding tunnels, and you can also use it as an alternative to hay if you or your gerbils have allergies. Now I paid around £3.50 for this bag of 175 grams, which works out at about £20 per kilogram, so it's pretty expensive compared to other beddings. But if you're only using it in addition to other beddings, you won't need to use too much at once. I used about half a bag for my recent setup along with hemp and hay. I really like using this bedding for using in their nests and as an addition to hay for extra structure. So I'm giving this one an A. There are a few different options when it comes to wood-based beddings. The 3 I'm going to look at are beech, aspen, and pine and cedar, which I'm going to look at together. When it comes to wood-based beddings, I'm only looking at wood shavings or pieces, not sawdust. Wood shavings, as the name suggests, are thin slices of wood that are shaved off as the wood is being cut. Sawdust is also created while wood is being cut, but it's the tiny dusty particles that are left over after cutting. So because it's dust, this can irritate a gerbil's sensitive respiratory systems, which makes it unsafe to use at all, so sawdust gets an F. The first type of wood shavings that I'm going to look at are pine and cedar. There's a lot of mixed evidence in both the gerbil community and the scientific literature as to the safety of pine and cedar bedding. The main thing which is suggested to be the cause of safety concerns are the odor compounds which are emitted from the woods, also known as volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, some of which may be toxic to gerbils and other rodents. Now, the suggestion is that kiln drying may reduce this and thus make the bedding safe. According to the research, kiln drying does reduce some, but not all, of the VOCs in pine wood, and it may leave some potentially toxic compounds behind. So whether or not kiln drying makes it safe to use depends on exactly which compounds are causing irritation. But unfortunately, there's no research that I can find on this with rodents. But it has been suggested by some authors that resin oils and phenols may be the culprit. And based on my experience of using kiln-dried pine with my gerbils, it irritated their noses, so I would advise against using it, and this bedding gets an F on the ratings. Now, the next type of wood that you can use with gerbils is beech, which doesn't come in the form of wood shavings. Instead, it's small chunks of wood. As a wood, beech is perfectly safe to use with gerbils. It doesn't emit the potentially toxic compounds that pine and cedar do, and it's also virtually dust-free, so it gets full marks for safety. As it's chunks of wood as opposed to wood shavings, it's not very absorbent, and it's also not very good for odor control. And it's not particularly comfortable to walk on either. And it's got virtually no structure, so it wouldn't be good for building burrows. You can get beech chips for around £6 for 1.3 kilograms, so around £4.60 per kilogram, which is on the cheaper side for beddings. Now, because of the problems with structure for tunnel building, I wouldn't recommend using this as a main bedding. But you could maybe use it in a separate dig box as a bit of enrichment. So overall, although it's a very safe bedding, I'd only give it a C when it comes to using it in your main enclosure, because even with massive amounts of hay, beech chips will still struggle to maintain tunnel structure, and they're very hard and uncomfortable. And next up is aspen, which is often considered to be the gold standard when it comes to wood shavings. So like beech, there's no safety concerns from VOCs, but depending on the brand or type of aspen you're using, there may be varying levels of dust. The one I tried previously was very dusty, but the snake bedding seems to be much lower in dust as far as I can tell. So like paper pulp, it may take some trial and error to find one that's suitable. Aspen is generally very absorbent and good for odor control, so it gets full marks for hygiene. It's also a pretty soft and comfortable bedding, especially the snake versions, which are tiny shredded pieces of aspen designed to protect a snake's sensitive skin as it moves around. So it's extra soft and comfy for our rodent friends. The wood shavings are pretty good at maintaining tunnel structure, but the snake bedding is excellent for structure, as the tiny pieces are really good at holding together. Snake aspen costs around £16 for 1.8 kilograms, so it's about £9 per kilogram, which is not the most expensive, but not the cheapest either. So overall, if you're using a less dusty type of aspen, such as the snake bedding, then I'd give it an A. I think it can make an excellent addition to gerbil enclosures, and it can work well as a main substrate, but I would be careful to check that the brand you're using isn't too dusty. Another type of bedding that's similar to wood beddings is hemp. One major benefit of using hemp is that it's naturally very low in dust, but like many of the other beddings, it may vary depending on which brand you use. I found Hemp Hooray to be almost completely dust-free, but the particles on this one are smaller, so there's more of a buildup of dust. But this can be easily removed by using a colander or a large sieve to filter out the smaller pieces before you use it in your enclosure. Or as an alternative, you could try some of the reptile or small pet versions of hemp and see what they're like. I also found that Timon and Pumbaa struggled with irritated noses with every bedding I tried until I tried hemp, so it gets full marks on safety for me. Much like wood-based beddings, hemp is really good at absorbing moisture and smell, and it also has a really pleasant earthy smell. It's relatively soft to the touch, but it's not as soft as paper or snake aspen. So if you do use hemp, it's a good idea to give them an extra type of softer bedding in their nest areas. So hemp is somewhere in between beech chips and wood shavings in terms of its ability to hold tunnel structure. It can form weak structures when compacted, but these can very easily fall apart. So to be able to be used with gerbils, it needs another type of bedding, such as hay or shredded paper, to help it hold tunnels. It needs almost equal parts hay and hemp to be able to properly form structures. But if you do this, gerbils will have no problems building their usual intricate tunnels. Another major benefit of hemp, at least in the UK, is that it's relatively low in cost compared to some of the other beddings. You can get it for around £21 per 20 kilograms, which is just over £1 per kilogram, which is much cheaper than the other beddings. For the reptile version, it costs a bit more at around £4.70 per kilograms, but it's still cheaper than some of the other options. So while hemp does need another bedding to give it enough structure, I found it's been really great at reducing irritation in my gerbils, and I'm going to give it an A. Next up is hay. And it's worth remembering that not all hays are made equal. Some of them are more likely to trigger allergies than others, which is important to consider if you or your gerbils are sensitive to certain types of hay. Orchard grass hay is considered to be the most hypoallergenic, although there are also others that are considered to be hypoallergenic, so I'd suggest doing some of your own research and trying a few different types of hay if you find you or your gerbils are sensitive to the one you're using. Apart from the potential allergy concerns, hay is naturally low in dust and it usually comes dust extracted, so there are no other safety concerns. It's not very good at absorbing moisture and smells, so it needs another type of bedding to be used alongside it. Certain types of hay are softer than others, so the comfort varies depending on which type you're using. For example, Timothy hay has more straw-like strands than meadow or orchard grass hay. Hay is excellent at maintaining the structure of tunnels, so it's a great addition to virtually all setups, and gerbils love to shred it and use it for nest building. The cost of hay varies massively depending on which type of hay it is that you're using. Meadow hay, for example, you can get for around £1 per kilogram, but orchard grass hay can cost as much as £12 per kilogram. So overall, because of the benefits hay gives to tunnel structure, as well as being something for gerbils to chew on and wear down their teeth, I'd give hay an A. I'd highly recommend you use some type of hay in your enclosure setup if you're able to. So next I'm going to take a look at soil. While soil may be what's most natural, wild gerbils dig their burrows deep underground where soil is more able to retain its moisture and is more able to hold its structure. This is where a major problem comes in with using soil as the main substrate in a gerbil enclosure. We will need to maintain the moisture of the soil for it to be able to properly hold burrows, which may end up being quite difficult and could potentially cause problems with mold growth. I would be wary of using general soil from the garden centre because of the potential pesticides and fertilisers in it. So the best options would be either cocoa soil, which costs around £4 per kilogram, or tortoise terrain for around £3 per kilogram. So I personally wouldn't like to use soil as the main substrate because of the potential maintenance problems. But it may be good to use as an additional substrate in a dig box, which you can put in their enclosure if you've got space in your topper, or you can put it in their playpen. So overall, I'd probably give soil a B. Another option that you may come across is eco-bedding, which is essentially shredded pieces of cardboard. It's perfectly safe to use, but because it's just cardboard, it won't be great at absorbing moisture and smells, so you'll probably need to use another bedding alongside it. But cardboard can be good at adding structure to burrows, so it could definitely be a good addition to your bedding mix. And at a cost of around £2.20 per kilogram, it's a relatively low cost bedding to add, so I'd give it an A. It's not that common, but occasionally there are suggestions to use wood pellets as a bedding, and they're not appropriate for a few reasons. The first being that they're pellets and they have absolutely no structure, so they'd be no good for building burrows. They're also very hard and uncomfortable and may disintegrate when wet, and they rarely say what type of wood the pellets are made from, so it's best to avoid them, and I'd give them an F. Cotton or fluffy beddings are something else that's often labelled as safe for small pets, but because they separate into strands, they may end up getting wrapped around limbs and are not safe if swallowed because they can't be digested, so they also get an F. Now if you take a look at my ranking system, you may notice that the top ranking of S is empty. This isn't a mistake, but it's because I don't believe any one bedding by itself is best, but that a mix of different substrates not only helps with tunnel structure, but adds extra enrichment. So for an S ranking bedding, mix some or all of the beddings that didn't fail to create a really enriching environment for your gerbils to explore. I've linked all of the beddings in the description if you want to use some of them for your own setup. Let me know in the comments what your experiences are with different beddings and if you'd rank any of them differently. And if you want some ideas of how to use some of these beddings in your own enclosure setup, then check out this video over here where I create a buried underground playground for Timon and Pumbaa, and I'll see you over there. Thanks for watching.